clergy abuse crisis. U.S. bishops vote on a measure to hold themselves accountable. We have a report and analysis from Baltimore. Working late. Lawmakers debate until 4 in the morning and cut several pro-life protections from spending bills. We're on Capitol Hill. Fight for the unborn. The governor of Illinois signs a measure expanding access to abortion. And icing on the cake. Pope Francis praises an international sport for its beauty. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, June 13th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The U.S. bishops vote overwhelmingly to take concrete steps to address the church's sex abuse crisis. They passed several new measures today, including a plan to create a national third-party reporting system. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby is following the meetings this week. He joins us from their Baltimore meeting. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The bishops appear to be in good spirits since they voted on the biggest issue on their agenda, and that's accountability. They've wanted to vote on a number of new standards and practices, how to report sex abuse since November. And one of their ideas is setting up a national third-party reporting hotline, what some have called a sophisticated switchboard. Now that they have general guidelines from Pope Francis, they're ready to take their ideas and put them into practice.
The voting is closed. Please display the result of the vote. 218, the motion passes.
Thank you. Thanks.
Applause for more than 200 bishops this morning as church leaders vote almost unanimously in favor of a series of standards in wake of the crisis.
Recognizing that we have even a greater responsibility.
Cardinal Joseph Tobin of Newark and Bishop Robert Deeley of Portland, Maine, answered questions about how bishops are implementing Pope Francis' new apostolic letter on sex abuse. Today, the bishops voted in favor of these principles: provide for the utilization of a national third-party reporting system, underscore the need for pastoral care for victims, encourage involvement of lay experts, affirm the responsibility of metropolitan bishops who oversee a specific region as part of the investigation, and finally, recognize the diocese or province where a sex abuse crisis occurs and work with the local church to address the problem. Today, I asked Cardinal Tobin about one issue we didn't hear much about, how the bishops are supposed to work with local police and prosecutors. What role does that play? How do the bishops work with civil authorities on this issue?
Speaking, for example, for the province of Newark, which is our 5 dioceses in New Jersey, we, since 2002, have had a memorandum of understanding with each of the 21 county prosecutors in the state that we will report any criminal activity.
His Eminence says there are similar agreements in other dioceses across the country. He says problems of sexual abuse and potential cover-ups cannot be handled in-house. His diocese has worked with authorities on sexual abuse investigations against the former Archbishop of Washington and Newark, Theodore McCarrick. McCarrick was defrocked after it was revealed he sexually abused young people and seminarians.
There are still demands by several lay groups to release all of the documents the church may have on Theodore McCarrick. Cardinal Tobin responded today by saying they are still working with prosecutors on the report. He says eventually a report will come out, but did not give a timeline on that. One other question that was brought up by bishops today is how much it would cost, at least initially, to set up this reporting hotline they had talked about. Right now, the cost appears to be between $30,000 to $50,000. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from Baltimore in the bishops' meeting. Thank you, Wyatt. Bishop Robert Deeley from the Diocese of Portland, Maine joins us now. Bishop Deeley is chairman of the Committee on Canonical Affairs and Church Governance. Your Excellency, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you.
One expert on child abuse has said that there is only one appropriate third party, and that's legal authorities. How will this sex abuse hotline interface with law enforcement?
I don't think the hotline itself will necessarily interface with legal authority, civil authority, but the report that comes in, which is required to be reported to civil authorities, will be reported to civil authorities within the scope of the receiving and investigation of the complaint.
I think the people are concerned about sort of the feeling about the church that they can't trust the church. A Pew Research Center study said that the majority of Americans think this is an ongoing problem, despite strides bishops say have been made. Your reaction to that?
I think that that's an unfortunate opinion because I think that great strides have been made. And the fact of the matter is that the incidences of sexual abuse are very small in comparison to what was the case years ago. I think that the protocols which were put into place in 2002 have been very successful. We have a church, an entire church in my diocese, which is conscious and aware of the scourge of sexual abuse and is being vigilant in addressing it in such a way that we have been successful in minimizing the amount of cases that we have. We have not had a substantiated allegation in the diocese for almost 25 years. So I think that the fact of the matter is that what has happened has been successful, and I just think that the new stories, however, bring us back to old events, and they get retold, and they're always terrible. I mean, the harm that's been done is great, and continues to be great for those who are survivors of this abuse. But I do think that we have made strides, and we have put into place successful programs and successful things which have made it possible for us to see the church as a place in which there is safety for all of us.
Let's talk about the lay involvement. That's very important to many people. Is it an individual bishop's choice to involve laity in these processes?
Let's remember the church that we are. We are the church. We are not clergy and lay people. We are the church together. There is no bishop in this country who is not already using lay people to assist him in dealing with both the difficulties and also the challenges of evangelization. Each of us has a full staff of lay people. Each of us has a review board, which is made up predominantly of lay people. So the involvement of lay people is already very much a part of who we are, because together we are the church.
We are just so grateful to you for joining our program, for making those distinctions for our audience. And our audience does hear a lot of the secular media and a lot of the negativity, and we're grateful that you're able to give us some clarifications. Bishop Robert Deeley of the Diocese of Portland, Maine, chairman of the Committee of Canonical Affairs on Canonical Affairs and Church Governance. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Lauren. Thank you.
The Congregation of the Holy Cross, which founded the University of Notre Dame, has identified 14 priests and one seminarian credibly accused of sexually abusing minors. The allegations date from the 1940s. 10 of the clergy have died, 2 are elderly and living in health facilities, 3 are no longer with the order. The head of the Southern Baptist Convention has outlined steps to combat its sexual abuse crisis. Reverend J.D. Greer says the scandal has left the largest U.S. Protestant denomination, quote, brokenhearted and angry. He blamed it on years of cover-ups. Greer was speaking at the end of the church's annual meeting in Birmingham, Alabama. And House Democrats try to strip away pro-life safeguards. They are against the Trump administration's new rules protecting medical professionals' rights to listen to their conscience. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The bill will meet strong opposition here in the Republican-controlled Senate. And even if it passed, President Trump has vowed to veto any bills that weaken current pro-life protections or lead to the destruction of innocent human life.
Here we are.
Democrats control the House, and Congress holds the power of the purse. Democrats are using that power to try to weaken pro-life protections.
Let me be clear on the Hyde Amendment. I would repeal it tomorrow.
And I think that is overwhelmingly the feeling of our caucus.
The Hyde Amendment bans taxpayer funds from going to most abortions. It's added each year. House Democrats need their bill to pass the Republican Senate and gain the president's signature. So Democrats this year step back on stripping the Hyde Amendment.
I believe that every single candidate for president who served in either the House or the Senate, every single one of them voted for an appropriations bill that contains the Hyde Amendment.
All of those candidates say they want it gone. Most recently, Joe Biden.
If I believe health care is a right, as I do, I can no longer support an amendment that makes that right dependent on someone's zip code.
Although Hyde is safe for now, Democrats are still trying to use this spending bill to block the president's Mexico City policy. It bans U.S. aid from going to foreign groups that promote or provide abortions.
When you believe, like I do, that life begins at conception, you don't want to kill it, just like you wouldn't kill a 1-year-old child. If you believe it's a human at 1 year old, I believe it's a human after it's conceived. I wouldn't kill a 1-year-old. I wouldn't be giving a woman the right to kill a 1-year-old.
The House spending bill would scrap the Mexico City policy permanently. It also tries to limit the administration's new restrictions on fetal tissue research. Republicans say Democrats are trying to tie the hands of the president, but he may not need those hands to veto this bill, as the Senate will likely block it. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thanks for breaking that down. The governor of Illinois yesterday signed a law expanding access to abortion. Democrat J.B. Pritzker signed the measure. It establishes women's access to the procedure as a fundamental right. He was surrounded by abortion rights advocates from Planned Parenthood and the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois. A federal watchdog recommends White House advisor Kellyanne Conway be removed from her job. It says she repeatedly violated the Hatch Act, a law that limits political activity by government workers. The agency does not have the power to fire Conway. That decision can only be left to President Trump. And President Trump says he'd be willing to accept political dirt on his 2020 presidential opponents from foreign governments. And today, despite swift criticism from lawmakers, he's defending those controversial remarks. But first, we have some developing news from the White House. Our White House correspondent, Mark Irons, has been following the president's Twitter feed and has this report. Good evening, Mark.
Well, Lauren, good evening. President Trump has now confirmed in a tweet that after 3.5 years, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, will be leaving the White House at the end of this month. He goes on to thank her for her work. There are no further details at this point, but you can just add that to the number of headlines already coming out of the White House today. And going back to that other story, the president's controversial remarks, he says if he felt there was a reason to report information from foreign governments, if there was something wrong with it, then he said maybe he'd go to the FBI, but he clearly believes it's fine to hear what they have to say.
As you people know,
President Trump is on the defensive after his remarks yesterday in an interview with ABC. In the interview, he was asked what he would do if Russia or another country offered him dirt on his election opponent. President Trump said, "I think I'd want to hear it. There's nothing wrong with listening." The president added he'd have no obligation to call the FBI. Today, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi slamming the president.
Yesterday, the president gave us once again evidence that he does not know right from wrong.
And the president's own golf buddy, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, was even critical of his remarks.
I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake of law. I don't want to send a signal to encourage this.
U.S. intelligence has been clear Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election. Special counsel Robert Mueller painstakingly documented Russian efforts to boost Trump's campaign and undermine that of his Democratic rival. But he did not say there was a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. President Trump adds, "I meet and talk to foreign governments every day. Should I immediately call the FBI about these calls and meetings? How ridiculous."
President Trump is talking about diplomatic meetings with foreign leaders there in those tweets. But the FBI director has said if a public official is contacted by any nation state about influencing an election, that's something the FBI would want to know about. The president said in that interview with ABC yesterday, the FBI director is wrong. Lauren?
Mark, what interesting news about that, but also about Sarah Sanders. It looks like she is going back to Arkansas after those 3.5 years now that she's been at the White House. Thank you so much, White House correspondent Mark Irons. The United States is blaming Iran for attacks on 2 oil tankers near the Persian Gulf. Video from Iranian state media reportedly shows damage to one of the 2 vessels involved in a security incident in the Gulf of Oman. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo calls the attacks part of a campaign of escalating tension by Tehran. Boris Johnson takes a commanding lead in the contest to become Britain's next prime minister. Conservative Party lawmakers take part in the first round of voting, reducing the field from 10 to 7. Johnson is the former mayor of London and a leading Brexit campaigner. He secured 114 votes. The next highest had less than 50. Israel's Supreme Court rules against the Greek Orthodox Church in a real estate battle. A former patriarch sold 3 properties in predominantly Palestinian parts of Jerusalem to a Jewish settler group. Church officials say he did not have the authorization to do so. And Pope Francis is asking for obedience from Vatican ambassadors.
Fare una preghiera in silenzio e poi insieme per lui.
After leading the group in prayer, the Holy Father reminded the diplomats of their duties before him, God, and the faithful. He said they may have reservations about papal policy, but they cannot, quote, criticize the Pope behind his back or join groups hostile to him. Coming up, analysis of attempts in the U.S. to legalize assisted suicide. Maine becomes the 8th state to legalize medically assisted suicide, and the Bishop of the Diocese of Portland tells us he's not happy. Bishop Robert Deeley, who we heard from earlier in our broadcast, wrote to his flock, allowing doctors to prescribe deadly medications to hasten a person's death is a horrendous wound to the dignity of the human person. This law devalues individual human life and the essential human bonds that call us to value one another and care for one another. This is a sad day for Maine. Joining me now is Wesley Smith, Senior Fellow at the Discovery Institute's Center on Human Exceptionalism and author of several books on assisted suicide and euthanasia. Welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you for having me.
18 states have considered assisted suicide legislation this year. How has this become so acceptable and commonplace in American society?
Well, I think we're becoming a pro-suicide society. At least some of us are becoming pro-some suicides. But it isn't an accident. There's a lot of money, George Soros money and other money being poured into this advocacy, millions of dollars per year. And you have a media that, generally speaking, is in the tank for this issue. They like to play up the emotional issues of people who just want to die. But they don't get into the real reasons why this is a terrible idea. It's bad medicine and even worse public policy.
Well, the American Medical Association, the largest group of doctors, just came out and said, I'm going to read the quote here, that physician-assisted suicide is fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role as healer and would pose serious societal risks. So will this declaration make a difference?
Less and less, it seems, because what's really bothersome is our institutions no longer have the kind of influence that they once had. But I'm really happy that at least the American Medical Association, remember, is part of the Hippocratic Oath.
Well, I just want to clarify that it reaffirms its position.
Right, it's been there for a long time.
Right,
and there was a lot of pressure to make it go neutral.
Go away.
And
go
they
neutral.
didn't do that, yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Well, as more states enact these assisted suicide laws, does the federal government have a moral obligation to interfere?
It's pretty tough to do. You know, we do have a federalism country, and this seems to be a state issue. I do think the federal government could say you cannot use federally controlled substances to intentionally cause death. But other than that, it's going to be very difficult. It seems to me if you oppose this agenda, you're going to have to be in the trenches, winning it state by state by state. And as you mentioned, most of the time, these laws are defeated, but that doesn't get the same attention when on occasion it is accepted.
When it is accepted, like Maine becoming this 8th state. Let's go down memory lane. And in 2000, you wrote The Culture of Death, The Assault on Medical Ethics in America. There was only one place in the world at that time that had legally assisted suicide, and that was Oregon. So what are your thoughts as you have watched this progression, this global discussion? What can we do, can anyone do, to reverse the tide?
We have to take care of people. It seems to me that there's a deep nihilism that has afflicted the West. And perhaps it's a part of decadence because we're so successful. But we now are in a situation where, for example, in Belgium, mentally ill people are brought to hospitals. They are euthanized and they're moved to an operating theater and their organs are harvested. And if you're in a society where that is happening, and it is about to happen in Canada, where they're creating, not for the mentally ill, but they're creating what I call kill and harvest protocols because they have euthanasia as well, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we becoming and why are we becoming that way?
Well, we know that the Catholic Church believes that this is completely unacceptable, and we thank you so much, Wesley Smith, for coming on our program, Senior Fellow at the Discovery Institute's Center on Human Exceptionalism.
Thank you for having me.
Up next, pilgrims in France walk in the footsteps of those from the 12th century. More than 14,000 Catholics walked 62 miles from Paris, France to Chartres Cathedral. Pilgrims from around the world trekked through the French countryside last weekend to participate in the annual Pentecost pilgrimage for 3 days. Catholics walked, praying the rosary, singing, and talking together, only stopping for Mass and to camp for the night. Joining me now is Catholic News Agency Rome correspondent Courtney Grogan. She was on that pilgrimage. Courtney, the tradition of walking from Notre Dame to Chartres Cathedral dates back to the 12th century. It must have been so great to walk in those footsteps. How has the pilgrimage evolved over the years?
The medieval pilgrimage route was revived by French Catholics in the 1980s and has since then grown to be the largest pilgrimage of its kind in Western Europe. Today, the 62-mile route from Notre Dame to Chartres is condensed into a rigorous 3 days of walking with opportunities for prayer, confession, and Mass along the way.
Wow, and camping overnight, I know. I don't know if I'd be up for that part of it, but you walked alongside pilgrims from Ireland, Syria, Iraq. What did they tell you about their experiences?
Many of the pilgrims I met with as we walked along the way told me that they were offering their pilgrimage for special prayer intentions. One 16-year-old girl I met from Ireland told me that she was praying for the protection of unborn children in her country after Ireland legalized abortion last year. I also met a young Catholic from Syria who remained in Aleppo with his family throughout the entire Syrian civil war. And he told me that he was offering his pilgrimage as a prayer for peace.
Oh my gosh, these stories sound really dramatic. The pilgrimage's opening Mass is traditionally held right at Notre Dame Cathedral, but it was moved because of the damage caused by the fire that it destroyed the spire and timber roof in April. Do you have any new information about Notre Dame's reconstruction?
The rector of Notre Dame Cathedral just announced this week that the first Mass since the devastating fire will be taking place this Saturday. The Mass is not open to the public, but will be broadcast live on French television. About 20 people are expected to attend the Mass in the side chapel that once contained the relic of Christ's crown of thorns. Each attendee will be required to wear a hard hat, though, due to the remaining safety concerns.
Well, that's something. I don't think many people have ever been to a Mass in a hard hat, but wow, how great that they're doing that and that it's open. And it sounds like you just had an amazing experience. Courtney Grogan, thank you so much for joining us. She's our Catholic News Agency Rome correspondent.
Thank you, Lauren.
Finally tonight, Pope Francis meets a delegation from the International Skating Union, and he praises their sport for its beauty.
Lo sport, in una parola, è sempre pensato per essere al servizio dell'umanità.
The Holy Father says figure skating offers an exhilarating experience of life. He also says sports in general are an expression of joy and praises that they are open to people of every age. I say ice skating is beautiful unless you are me, who tries to join your daughter and support of her ice skating and gets on the ice, and then it just gets really messy from there. But she's beautiful on the ice, and I'm sure there are many, many others who are. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter. Lauren Ashburn, EWTN on Facebook, from all of us here. Good night and God bless you.